Namaste and welcome to Daily News Simplified, the what, why and how of newspaper reading. Now we would be analyzing the Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper of 6th of May 2019, and the news that would be covered today is given on the screen, and the timestamp for the same is given in the description and the comment section given below. Now I'm happy to announce that the final booklet of your prelims compass has been released. Now this final prelims compass booklet focuses on two important aspects of your prelims examination syllabus. First is current events of international importance, and apart from this it also highlights various current events of national importance. Now this final prelims compass booklet is available on the Amazon website. Now the content for the current event of international importance has been divided in 7 parts. Now all of the questions that have been asked in your prelims examination within the syllabus of current events of international importance has been asked from 7 different perspectives. The first being of international agreements which were in the news. The second being the international groupings and international meets which might have happened in the past 2 years. The third is of the international crises which have been in the news, and within that context various important locations with regards to international crisis have also been asked. Now this prelim compass also includes all the important locations that might have appeared in the news with regards to the Yemen crisis or the Syrian crisis or the Afghan war or the Iranian nuclear deal or any other form of international crisis. The fourth aspect on which questions are asked is with regards to international projects. The fifth topic on which questions are asked on your prelims examination is with regards to international organizations. Now what is generally seen is that static part of that international organization might be asked. And therefore in this prelims compass, the static part with regards to international organizations has also been covered. The sixth aspect that you need to understand is political geography, and in particular this section highlights your map practice. Now as you already understand, locations are either asked with regards to international crisis or with regards to some form of important political geography. Whereby, as you already understand, the importance of Kartarpur corridor. Apart from this, we have also discussed the importance of Atbara in Sudan, from which the second Arab Spring has started. And similarly, it also includes various communities which have also been in the news. So you have the Uyghur community which is located in Xinjiang, China, or the Yazdi group which is located in Iraq. Similarly, within the section of international crisis, important ethnic communities have also been highlighted. So you have the Druze community which is located in the Golan Heights, which has been covered within the section of Israeli conflicts. And similarly you have the Hazara community which has been strongly affected by the Afghan war, or the Houthi community which has strongly been involved in the Yemen war. Now the last aspect which has been covered with regards to current events of international importance are important snippets which might not fall in the already defined 6 sections. So it includes various indexes which were recently in the news, such as the Passport Index, or the EIU Democracy Index, or the Global Peace Index. And apart from this, it also highlights various important humanitarian missions which has been undertaken by India, such as in the country of Mozambique, Indonesia, and in Yemen. Now there are more than 125 topics which have been covered within these 7 sections. And all of these topics with regards to current events of international importance has been explained in a brief format so that it may allow you for a quick revision. Now apart from this, various important information with regards to the field of environment, economy, social issues, and may have appeared in the newspaper from February to May have also been included in this final booklet. Now this would allow you a complete coverage of current events of both international and national importance. Now apart from this, I also want to highlight that various questions or MCQs which have been asked in your DNS videos or the Daily News Simplified videos have also been provided with regards to art and culture and with regards to current events of international importance within the description section given below. Now going through these MCQs which have been asked in the Daily News Simplified videos with regards to art and culture and with regards to international relations would allow you a quick revision of the various topics that have appeared in the Hindu newspaper. And so now with this, let us move on to the first article for today. Now we have taken the lead editorial from the editorial page on page 8. Now the main focus of the author within this editorial is about jobs and how they are different from the concept of work. Now the author has talked about various aspects about job and work within this editorial. However, these aspects are not completely interlinked with each other. And therefore what we're going to do today is try to understand them in a much simpler format, which is relevant with regards to specific sections which has been given in your UPSC mains examination syllabus. Now this article should first be seen from the perspective of GS paper 2 within the section social justice and within the subsection issues relating to development and management of social sector services relating to human resources. Now apart from this, the main aspect through which this editorial should be seen is from the perspective of GS paper 4 and within the subsection work culture. Now the author in this editorial first talks about two related aspects, first being work and the second being job. Now the difference between work and job in a simpler format within the context of this editorial is that a person works to ensure a basic income through which he is able to ensure basic necessities and a basic livelihood. While a job, apart from providing a basic income so that you're able to enjoy basic necessities and have a basic livelihood, a job also provides an ability to fulfill a personal aspiration. And therefore a job provides both work and an ability to fulfill personal aspirations. Now the author within this editorial highlights on how the word aspirational is being misused within India, especially by politicians. Now in simplest of terms, aspiration means wanting or having a desire to achieve a high level of success and social status. But what is happening in India, according to the author, is that the word aspiration is being misused, especially by politicians, to mean desires for basic necessities. Now jobs, good housing, educational opportunities, among other are basic necessities that the government is supposed to provide to its citizens. But what is happening in India is that politicians and policy makers are showcasing youth that want a job as being aspirational youth, or people who live in slums that want a good housing as aspirational urban poor. And therefore they are misusing the word aspirational to mean desires of individuals or citizens of India for basic necessities. Now what is happening is that the government is trying to show demand for basic necessities as desires or aspirations of the citizens of India to achieve something greater in life. And when the government ends up providing the basic necessities that it is required to provide to its own people, they end up showcasing it as a revolutionary change. So a government providing basic income schemes is showcased as revolutionary change, or improvement of schools by a state government is showcased as revolutionary change, or the provision of providing temporary work on minimum wage under the Manrega program is also then showcased as revolutionary change by the government itself. Whereby all these aspects of providing basic income, good government schools, basic opportunities to earn a livelihood are basic responsibilities of the government. And by providing these basic necessities, you cannot say that you have fulfilled the aspirations of the youth or the urban poor or any other individual sections of the society. Now within this context, basic necessities should be provided to all citizens in an equal manner. And work opportunities or good schools is not something that Indian citizens should now have to be aspirational about. Now a simple example of this is what is seen in India is that many students aspire to become doctors, but the problem within India is that there are not enough MBBS and especially MD seats. Now providing educational opportunities to meritorious students to become doctors is one of the responsibilities of the government of India. And Indian students should not have to aspire to become doctors because of the limited MBBS or MD seats. And similarly, having good opportunities for jobs and not just work is one of the responsibilities of the government of India. And what is currently seen within India is that the government may open up jobs for, let's say, sweepers or other work opportunities in which you would see that various graduates, MA students and PhD students are applying for. And what the government does is that it showcases providing such basic jobs as being a revolutionary change, where they have opened up some government jobs for the unemployed youth of India. And what the argument that the author is trying to make is that several students who are graduate, postgraduates or even PhD students who are applying for such jobs, the government is not able to fulfill their personal aspirations. Meaning that they are able to earn a basic income so that they can enjoy a basic livelihood. But it does not mean that they are able to fulfill their personal aspirations. So now hopefully you've understood the first aspect which has been highlighted by the author with regards to the difference between work and job. Whereby hopefully you understand on how personal aspirations becomes an important difference between having work and having a job. Now, the second aspect with regards to the difference between job and work, which the author has highlighted, is with regards to job culture. Now, the first thing that you need to understand that when the author talks about job culture, it is different as to what we generally mean by work culture or organizational culture or a company culture. So when we say work culture, company culture, or organizational culture, it generally talks about a particular genre of industries or organizations. Whereby, let's say, the IT companies have a very different work culture from, let's say, the automotive industry. Or in a different aspect, the work culture or the company culture of Wipro might be very different from the company culture of TCS. Or the work culture within ISRO might be very different from the work culture in various other government agencies. Now, when the author is talking about job culture, he is talking about it in a much larger concept, whereby it talks about on how jobs are being created within the Indian economy. What are the major technological shifts that are happening with regards to jobs within the international economy, such as the impact of artificial intelligence, fourth industrial revolution, among other technological innovations? And it is within that context that when the author talks about job culture, it is very different from the concept of work, company, or organizational culture, whereby work culture is much more smaller in concept with regards to various companies, organizations, or a particular genre of industry. Now, it is within that context that the first aspect which the author talks about with regards to job culture is of youth, not in education, employment, or training. Now, what is being seen is that various Indian youth are not able to afford higher education, and because of this, they're not able to undertake proper employment opportunities or training programs which the private or the public education system offers. And therefore, what is being seen in India is that several youth are not undertaking any form of educational, employment, or training practices. The second aspect with regards to job culture, which the author is highlighting, is of the diploma disease. Now let us try to understand this with an example. Now let's say there is a particular person who has just graduated in the field of engineering. Now after graduating, this particular person is not able to find employment opportunities within the private companies or with government jobs. And therefore what happens after this is that this particular person would then probably may go for an MTech or an MS. And what this person is trying to do is improve his educational qualifications so that he may be able to get a job either with private companies or with regards to government jobs. However, what might be seen after having a postgraduate degree is that this person is still not able to find a job. And it is within that context that the author is trying to highlight the diploma disease, which means that degrees do not guarantee a job. Now, it is within that context that the author is trying to highlight that the job culture, especially within India, because of the diploma disease, has created a confusion where an individual does not know whether it is his personality or character or his passion that would guarantee him a job, or it is his educational qualifications that would guarantee him a job, or what level of educational qualification would guarantee him a better job. And also, what happens is that because individuals are trying to gain much more educational qualification, they miss out on improving their personality traits. And therefore, what is sometimes seen is that a highly qualified person may not get a particular job because he lacks in communication skills. And this is one of the downside of the diploma disease, whereby a person then gets carried away in gaining educational qualification but does not work on his personality traits such as communication skills and other aspects. Now, the third and the last aspect with regards to job culture which the author is highlighting is with regards to automation. Now, what is happening is that there has been increased automation with regards to the involvement of artificial intelligence, big data, use of robots, which has caused various jobs that used to exist earlier to not be useful anymore. Whereby what is being seen through automation is that it is creating a lot of temporary jobs. Now, what is happening is that several individuals who have been working a particular job for the last 10 to 15 years have had their jobs overtaken by automation. And therefore, according to the author, what this has created is a growing culture of temporary jobs, whereby the individuals who are entering the job market as of now may find their jobs not in existence after 10 to 15 years because of automation. And according to the author, this creation of temporary jobs, especially from automation, has created a lot of problems for low skilled and low income workers. Now, I'll give you a simple example for this. Now there's a Maruti plant within Manesar, whereby it used to employ around 800 welders within the last 10 years. However, what has happened is that the jobs of these welders have been overtaken by the use of robots. Whereby currently what is being seen is that the same Maruti plant within Manesar is only employing around 20 to 25 welders. Now what this has done is that automation has created problem for low skilled and low income workers, whereby welding was originally a low skilled job, and these individuals who have been thrown out of their jobs are now not able to have the proper skills or education to move to a different job. Now, according to the author, automation is going to create such temporary jobs much more within the future, whereby the job which might be in existence today may not be there after 10 to 15 years. So now hopefully you've understood the three basic features of job culture which has been highlighted by the author and how it is different from the concept of work culture. And so hopefully you have understood the two basic aspects that the author has highlighted within this editorial with regards to the difference between job and work. And so now with this, let us move on to the next article. Now we have taken this opinion-based editorial from the editorial page on page 8. Now the main focus of this editorial is that India is going to host the second mini ministerial meet of the World Trade Organization on 13th and 14th of May. Now the second mini ministerial meet is going to try and set a common agenda for the 12th ministerial conference that is going to be held in June of 2020 in Astana in Kazakhstan. Now what this editorial is trying to highlight are the various issues that might be discussed during the second mini ministerial meet that is going to be held in India. Now you have to understand that both the context and the focus of this editorial are news in transition. Now it is best to wait and see as to what would be the discussion that might be undertaken on 13th and 14th of May, and more importantly, what would be the outcomes of the second mini ministerial meet which is going to be held in India. However, what we're going to do today is understand some of the issues which have been highlighted by the author that might be discussed during this mini ministerial meet. And we'll discuss these issues only in a brief format since this is currently news in transition. Now the first issue which has been highlighted by the author is the Agreement on Agriculture. Now the Agreement on Agriculture seeks to put a limit on the subsidies which has been given by both developing and developed countries to their farmers. Whereby what is currently being seen is that developed countries such as the United States, European countries, Japan have been giving higher amount of subsidies to their farmers as compared to developing countries. And one of the main disagreement points between the developing and the developed countries is that countries such as the United States have refused to reduce their farm subsidies. And this is negatively impacting the farm sectors of the developing and poor economies. Whereby let's say countries such as India, Indonesia, Brazil have produced a large amount of wheat and they want to export it to the European or the United States. But what is currently happening in these European countries is that they're heavily subsidizing the wheat that have been produced by their farmers. So let's say if their farmers have produced a quintal of wheat at $100, the subsidies given by the US or the European governments would make the cost of wheat for their consumers to be at $20. Now farmers within developing countries such as India, Brazil, Indonesia and others are able to produce a quintal of wheat at let's say $50. And therefore if they're able to export it to the European or the United States market, they would be able to earn a large amount of profit. So when the developing countries want to export their agriculture products such as wheat to the European or the US market, their pricing is then not competitive because of the heavy subsidies which has been given by the US and the European governments. Now what the developing countries want is that the developed countries such as the US and the Europe should reduce the amount of subsidies that they're giving to their farmers. And this is one of the issues that might be discussed during the mini ministerial meet of the World Trade Organization which is going to be held in India. Now the second aspect with regards to the Agreement on Agriculture which has been a major focus for India is with regards to the food security and the peace clause. Now as you already might be aware of, India is implementing the National Food Security Act. Now to implement this National Food Security Act, India has to procure or buy a lot of grains from Indian farmers. Now to buy these grains to implement the National Food Security Act, India provides a lot of subsidies to Indian farmers. Now according to WTO rules, there was a 10% limit on the amount of subsidies that India can provide. But because India wanted to implement the National Food Security Act, at the Bali Ministerial Conference in December of 2013, the peace clause was decided upon, whereby India can increase its subsidies from the limit of 10% so as to implement the National Food Security Acts. And this peace clause would continue till a permanent solution to this problem has been found upon. Now, according to the authors, the continuation and the permanent solution with regards to this peace clause would be discussed upon during the second mini-ministerial meet of the World Trade Organization, which is going to be held in India. The second issue of focus would be with regards to non-tariff barriers. Now, as you already might be aware of, that because of the global trade war, the United States has imposed a lot of tariff barriers on other countries, and similarly, developing countries with themselves also have a lot of tariff barriers, and therefore tariff barriers is going to be a major discussion during the upcoming meet. The third issue which has been highlighted by the author is with regards to e-commerce policy. Now what is happening is that developed countries, especially the United States, has been pushing forward for a comprehensive agreement on e-commerce. However, there is disagreements among countries with regards to data localization, custom duties, cross-border sales of e-commerce companies, the sale of products on e-commerce, and several other issues of dispute with regards to the e-commerce policy might be discussed during the upcoming meet. Now the fourth and the last major topic of issue which the authors have highlighted that might be discussed during the upcoming meet is of special and differential treatment. Now WTO agreements contain special provisions which provide favors to developing countries. Now these provisions are special for developing countries and are different from the provisions for the developed countries. And one of the major issues which has come up is with regards to the special and differential treatment which is given to developing countries with regards to the fisheries development. Now the WTO has provided special and differential treatment to developing countries whereby they are able to provide subsidies so as to promote their fisheries sector. But one of the common complaints which has been given by developed countries is that the provision of these subsidies has led to overfishing and is adversely affecting the marine ecosystem, whereby it has led to illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing. Now the developed countries want to stop certain form of subsidies which is given to the fisheries sectors by the developing countries. However, countries like India, China, Indonesia, Brazil and others do not want any form of conditions or prohibitions to the subsidies that they are able to provide to their fisheries sector. Now this is going to be a major issue that is going to come up at the second mini-ministerial meet of the World Trade Organization that is going to be held in India. Now these are the four main issues which have been highlighted by the author. Now a detailed explanation of all of these four issues have also been provided in today's PDF for this DNS. However, it is best to wait and see as to what would be the discussion and the outcomes of the upcoming second mini-ministerial meet of the World Trade Organization, which is going to be held in India. And so now with this, let us move on to the next article. Now we have taken this article from page 7. Now this article needs to be understood from the perspective of your prelims examination within the section Current Events of National and International Importance. Now what is currently happening is that India and the United Kingdom are in negotiations, whereby India wants United Kingdom to build an aircraft carrier. And this aircraft carrier would be built on the same lines as the aircraft carrier of the United Kingdom known as the Queen Elizabeth. And it is expected that this aircraft carrier, which might be built by the United Kingdom, would be known as INS Vishal, whereby similar to the aircraft carrier of the United Kingdom, Queen Elizabeth, it would also be a super carrier. And it would be built within India, but the major supplier of parts would be the United Kingdom. Now if the deal between India and the United Kingdom does go through, then INS Vishal would be India's third aircraft carrier, whereby the first aircraft carrier is known as INS Vikramaditya, which India had built in collaboration with Russia, while the second Indian aircraft carrier is known as INS Vikrant. And INS Vikrant was built within India. Now you have to understand that the INS Vishal is still in negotiations, and we have to consider this as news in transition. But hopefully you've understood as to why INS Vishal was in the news. And so now with this, let us move on to the next article. Now we have taken this article from page 13. Now what this article highlights is a particular book called What the Economy Needs Now. And this book has been written by Geeta Gopinath, who is the Chief Economic Advisor of the International Monetary Fund, the former Governor of the Reserve Bank of India, Raghuram Rajan, among other authors. Now, the article in particular discusses about the various reforms that are required to improve the conditions of the public sector banks. Now, one of the reforms that is continuously said that can be undertaken to improve the public sector banks is to privatize them. Now, there are two main reasons which are given on how the privatization of public sector banks would improve their conditions. The first reason which is given is that it would decrease the political interference. The second reason which is given is that it would automatically improve the governance of the public sector banks. Now, the authors of the book, like Geeta Gopinath, Raghuram Rajan, have highlighted that it is not necessary that the privatization would lead to improvement of public sector banks. Now, they've highlighted that several private sector banks continue to suffer from poor administration. Now, according to the author, there are several public sector banks which have performed exceptionally well. And therefore, according to the authors, there is no reason as to why the privatization of public sector banks would lead to an improvement in its administrative governance. Now, it is within that context that the authors are saying that when we say privatization of public sector banks, it generally means a change in ownership of the banks. But the authors have shown that it is not necessary that if banks have private ownership, they would have better administrative governance. Whereby some public sector banks have already showcased efficient administrative governance, while some banks who have private ownership have suffered from poor administrative governance. Therefore, a change in the ownership from the government to the private sector does not mean that it would improve the public sector banks. Now, it is within that regard that the authors have highlighted as to what can be the possible solutions that can be undertaken to improve the conditions of the public sector banks. Now, it is within that regard the authors have given a recommendation to urgently implement the recommendations of the PG Nayak committee. Now, one of the recommendations which was given under the PG Nayak committee is to transfer the shareholding that the Government of India holds in public sector banks to a holding company known as the Bank Investment Company. Now, I'll try to explain this in a simple example. Now, if you take a look at the State Bank of India, about 58% of the shares of the State Bank of India is held by the Government of India. And similarly, if you take a look at other public sector banks such as PNB, Bank of Baroda and others, the Government of India would be the major shareholder. Now, what the PG Nayak committee is recommending is that the government should form a bank investment company and all the shareholding that the Government of India currently holds in all the public sector banks should be transferred to this bank investment company. Now, this bank investment company should be given complete autonomy and should have independent board of directors. Now, what this would ensure is that public sector banks do not have either private ownership or ownership by the Government of India. And this would ensure that the political interference within public sector banks also reduces. And secondly, it would also ensure meritorious independent directors are appointed to this bank investment company and thereby improving the conditions and the administrative governance of public sector banks. The second solution which has been highlighted in the article is to merge the poorly managed banks with good banks. The third solution which has been highlighted is that there should be a development in the capital market, meaning shares and bonds, and of non-banking finance companies, so that it reduces the over-reliance of the Indian economy on the public sector banking system. The fourth point which has been highlighted is reduce the government's obligations on the banking system. Now, what is seen is that the Government of India has put up a lot of obligations on the Indian banking system, especially the public sector banks. Now, these obligations are in the form of lending targets, compulsory loan waivers. Now, these obligations which have been put up by the Government of India increases the financial burden of the public sector banks. Similarly, it also reduces the functional autonomy of the public sector banks. Now, it is within this context that the authors are saying that the Government of India should reduce its obligations that it has put up on the banking system, especially the public sector banks. Now, the fifth and the last point which the authors have highlighted as possible solutions to improve the public sector banks are small steps which the Indian public sector banks can undertake so as to improve their efficiency. The first is to improve the human resource talent. The second is to improve their accounting practices. The third is to reduce their non-performing assets. The fourth is to follow better investment practices. And lastly, ensure accountability. Now, these are the 5 small steps which can be undertaken by the public sector banks so as to improve themselves. And largely, these are the 5 possible solutions which have been highlighted by the author so as to improve the public sector banks. And hopefully, you've also understood that the privatization of public sector banks is not a necessary step to improve their governance. Now, you should see this article and the explanation given in this section from the perspective of GS Paper 3 within the section Economy. And so now with this, let us move on to the next article. Now we have taken this article from page 7. Now what has happened is that the Government of India has formed an expert committee under Ratan P. Vatal. And this Ratan Vatal committee has been formed to examine the various aspects of the recommendation of the 7th Pay Commission on non-functional upgradation. Now after this, what you need to understand is what is non-functional upgradation. Now this non-functional upgradation was introduced for the civil services in 2009. Now in the simplest of terms, let's say there is an IAS officer of the 1987 batch and this person has been appointed as an additional secretary. Now what would happen is that there would be several other individuals who were IAS officers of the 1987 batch, but they could not be appointed as additional secretary because of the small number of vacancies that are available for additional secretary. So let's say there were 70 IAS officers that were appointed in 1987, but only 10 became additional secretaries because of the small number of vacancies. Now let's say these 10 individuals have been appointed as additional secretary within the year 2019. And once they're appointed, they would be given a higher pay scale. Now what would happen is that the other individuals who have also been appointed as IAS officer of the same batch, they would also be given this higher pay scale even though they have not been appointed as additional secretary. Now this is because it was not the fault of the other 60 individuals that there were only 10 positions that were open to become additional secretary. And therefore the lack of opportunities for promotion does not become a hindrance with regards to the increase in pay scale of all group A employees of the same batch. And this, in the simplest of terms, is referred to as non-functional upgradation. Now the non-functional upgradation is not provided to the 3 military services, which is the Army, Air Force and the Navy. And this has been a major demand of the armed forces to provide them with non-functional upgradation, whereby what is generally seen is that only 2% of the individuals within the army are able to reach the position of a major general. But what is seen with regards to the armed forces is that the individuals who have not been appointed to the post of the major general because of the limited number of seats that are available for major general, these individuals are not given a non-functional upgradation within their pay scale. And therefore this provision of a non-functional upgradation has been a major demand of the military forces. Now apart from this, what you also need to know is that the Central Armed Forces or the CAPF have also been provided with non-functional upgradation, whereby the Central Armed Police Forces were provided the non-functional upgradation in the year 2018. Now these are the main points that you need to remember from this article, and therefore let us move on to the next section. Now there are 2 questions for your practice, and what you need to do is pause this video, solve both of these questions and wait for 5 seconds for the correct answer. Now the correct answer to question number 1 is C, both 1 and 2. Now the purview of the PG Nayak committee was the governance of Board of Banks, while an earlier Ratan Vatal committee was formed whose purview was digital payments. Now a new expert committee has been formed under Ratan Vatal, and as we have already understood, the purview of the new Ratan Vatal committee is with regards to non-functional upgradation. So if the question had asked the Ratan Vatal committee and had in brackets the year 2016, then you should know that the purview of this committee report was on digital payments. And if the year mentioned in the bracket is of 2019, then you should know that the purview of this committee was of non-functional upgradation. Now with regards to question number 2, the correct answer is C, both 1 and 2. Whereby the WTO Ministerial Conference is the topmost decision-making body of the World Trade Organization. And similarly, it can take decisions on all matters under any of the multilateral trade agreements. Now, apart from this, what you also need to understand is that it is also mentioned that the General Council of the World Trade Organization is also its topmost decision-making body. However, you need to understand that the General Council is the topmost decision-making body with regards to day-to-day functioning of the World Trade Organization. Now, this is an important difference that you need to understand, that the World Trade Organization in itself calls the Ministerial Conference and the General Council as its topmost decision-making body. However, the Ministerial Conference is the topmost decision-making body whereby it can take decisions on all matters under any of the multilateral trade agreements of the World Trade Organization, while the General Council is the topmost decision-making body of the World Trade Organization with regards to its day-to-day functioning. Apart from this, what you also need to know is that it is the ministers of a country which are represented in the ministerial conference, while it is ambassadors or representatives of a country which appear in the General Council. Now there are two more questions for your practice, and as you already understand, pause this video, solve both of these questions, and wait for 5 seconds for the correct answer. Now the correct answer to question number 3 is C, both 1 and 2, whereby the lending targets which is given by the Government of India and the loan waivers increase the financial burden of public sector banks. While with regards to question number 4, as we have already understood, the INS Vishal was in the news as it might be India's third aircraft carrier that might be co-developed in collaboration with the United Kingdom. And now with this we come to an end in the analysis of today's newspaper. Now we move on to the question for today.